A young cop's hand trembled as he pointed his gun at a desperate mother clutching stolen medicine. In that moment, he had no idea his choice would unravel a conspiracy that would shake the foundations of an entire industry. Officer Jake Reynolds swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat as he stared down the barrel of his service weapon. The fluorescent lights of the small pharmacy buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the faces of the two figures locked in this tense tableau. On one side stood Jake, 25 years old and barely out of the police academy, his crisp blue uniform still stiff with newness. On the other, a woman in her early 30s, her eyes wild with fear and desperation, clutching a paper bag filled with stolen medication to her chest. "Please," the woman whispered, her voice cracking. "My son. He needs this. I can't afford it anymore." Jake's mind raced. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. A routine call about petty theft at a local pharmacy in Millbrook, a struggling mid-sized town hit hard by factory closures and rising unemployment. It should have been simple: catch the thief, book them, file the paperwork. But nothing about this felt simple. He took in the woman's appearance: disheveled hair, dark circles under her eyes, clothes that hung loose on her frame as if she'd lost weight recently. Behind her, a small boy peered out from behind a display of vitamins, his face pale and drawn. "Ma'am, put the bag down and step away," Jake said, trying to keep his voice steady. "We can talk about this, but I need you to comply first." The woman, Sarah Thompson, Jake would later learn, shook her head frantically. "You don't understand. They keep raising the prices. I've sold everything, worked 3 jobs. It's still not enough. He'll die without this medicine." Jake's partner, Detective Maria Sanchez, a veteran officer months away from retirement, placed a hand on his shoulder. "By the book, kid," she murmured. "Can't let emotions cloud judgment." But something didn't sit right with Jake. He'd grown up in Millbrook, watched it change from a thriving community to a town on the brink. Good people pushed to desperate acts. And now this. A mother stealing to save her child's life? "What's in the bag?" he asked, lowering his weapon slightly. Sarah's grip tightened. "Antibiotics. And his inhaler. Please. I tried to get help, but the clinic is overwhelmed, and insurance won't cover it anymore." Jake's mind flashed to the police academy, to lectures on ethics and the spirit of the law versus the letter, to discussions about community policing and the role of officers in society. This didn't feel like justice. It felt like a symptom of a much larger problem. He holstered his weapon, ignoring Maria's sharp intake of breath. "Let's talk," he said, gesturing to a quiet corner of the store. "I want to understand what's going on here." As Jake led Sarah and her son to a more private area, he caught sight of the pharmacist, Drive. Alan Prescott, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of concern and, was that guilt? Jake filed the observation away for later. Over the next hour, Sarah's story poured out. Her son, Tommy, suffered from a rare respiratory condition. The medication he needed had been affordable, if not cheap, for years. But in the last few months, the prices had skyrocketed. Sarah had lost her job at one of the shuttered factories, and even with multiple part-time gigs, she couldn't keep up. The local clinic, overwhelmed with similar cases, could only offer limited assistance. "I never thought I'd do something like this," Sarah said, wiping tears from her eyes. "But when I saw Tommy struggling to breathe last night, I couldn't just watch him suffer." Jake felt a knot forming in his stomach. This wasn't just about one desperate act. There was something rotten at the core of this situation, something that went beyond a simple case of theft. "Officer Reynolds, Drive," Prescott called out hesitantly. "A word, please?" Jake excused himself and approached the pharmacist, noting the man's nervous demeanor. I can't officially condone what Mrs. Thompson did," Prescott said in a low voice. "But you should know, she's not the only one struggling. These price hikes, they're unprecedented. People are rationing medication, skipping doses. It's getting dangerous." "Why the sudden increase?" Jake pressed. Prescott's eyes darted around, as if checking for eavesdroppers. "I can't say much, but look into Pharma Corp. They've been buying up smaller companies, controlling the supply chain. Something's not right there." Jake's mind was reeling as he rejoined Sarah and Tommy. He should be arresting her. It was protocol, but every instinct screamed that this was wrong. "Here's what we're going to do," he said, making a decision that would alter the course of his career and life. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm not arresting you today. But I need you to work with me. We're going to find a solution, not just for Tommy, but for everyone affected by this." Sarah's eyes widened in disbelief and gratitude. Even Tommy managed a weak smile. As Jake led them out of the pharmacy, he caught Maria's disapproving glare. "You're playing with fire, kid," she warned. "Maybe," Jake replied. "But sometimes you need to burn the old to make way for something better." Little did Jake know, as he watched Sarah and Tommy drive away with a promise to meet the next day, that he had just struck the match that would ignite a firestorm. A firestorm that would expose corruption at the highest levels, challenge his beliefs about justice and duty, and ultimately force him to decide what kind of cop, and what kind of man, he truly wanted to be. As the sun set over Millbrook, casting long shadows across its struggling streets, Officer Jake Reynolds stood at the precipice of a journey that would test his courage, his integrity, and his very understanding of right and wrong. The real investigation was just beginning. Jake's apartment was a reflection of his current state of mind, sparse and unsettled. He sat at his small kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of papers and his laptop, the blue glow of the screen illuminating his furrowed brow. It was well past midnight, but sleep eluded him as he dove deeper into his research. The more he dug into PharmaCorp and the recent spike in drug prices, the more unsettled he became. News articles, financial reports, and public records painted a disturbing picture. PharmaCorp had been on a buying spree, acquiring smaller pharmaceutical companies and patents. With each acquisition, prices seemed to climb. A knock at the door startled him from his focus. Jake tensed, hand instinctively moving towards his holstered weapon. He wasn't expecting anyone at this hour. "Jake? It's Maria. Open up." He relaxed slightly at the sound of his partner's voice, but confusion replaced his worry. What was Detective Sanchez doing here so late? Jake opened the door to find Maria looking as tired as he felt. Her salt and pepper hair was disheveled, and the lines around her eyes seemed deeper than usual. "We need to talk," she said, brushing past him into the apartment. Jake closed the door, watching as Maria surveyed the chaos of his investigation spread across the table. Her eyes narrowed. "You're really going through with this, aren't you?" she asked, a mix of disappointment and something else, concern, in her voice. "I can't just let it go, Maria," Jake replied, running a hand through his hair. "What's happening in this town? It's not right. People are suffering." Maria sighed heavily, sinking into a chair. "Kid, I've been on the force for 30 years. You think I haven't seen my share of injustice? Sometimes you have to accept that you can't change the whole system." Jake leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "So we just give up? Let corporations bleed people dry? It's not that simple, it is that simple." Jake interrupted, passion rising in his voice. "We took an oath to protect and serve. Who are we protecting if we turn a blind eye to this?" A tense silence fell between them. Maria studied Jake intently, as if seeing him for the first time. "You remind me of myself, you know," she finally said, her voice softer. "When I first started out. All that fire, that certainty." Jake's posture relaxed slightly. "What changed?" Maria's gaze drifted to the window, to the city beyond. Life. Bureaucracy. Seeing good cops try to change things and get chewed up by the system. "It wears you down, Jake. So why are you here?" Jake asked. "To talk me out of it?" Maria turned back to him, a glimmer of her old fire in her eyes. "No, I'm here because maybe I've been worn down for too long. And maybe, just maybe, you've reminded me of why I became a cop in the first place." Jake felt a surge of hope. Having Maria on his side could change everything. Her experience, her connections, it could be the key to blowing this whole thing wide open. "So you'll help?" he asked, trying to keep the eagerness out of his voice. Maria stood, her expression a mix of resignation and determination. "God help me, yes. But Jake, you need to understand what you're getting into. This isn't just about one company or one town. If what you suspect is true, we're talking about corruption that goes deep. Politicians, regulators, maybe even people in our own department." Jake nodded solemnly. "I know, but we have to try." As the night wore on, Jake filled Maria in on everything he'd discovered. The pattern of acquisitions by PharmaCorp, the sudden price hikes, the struggling families like Sarah Thompson's. Maria listened intently, occasionally asking pointed questions that revealed her years of investigative experience. "We need more," she said as dawn began to break. "Suspicions and circumstantial evidence won't be enough. We need hard proof of wrongdoing." Jake rubbed his tired eyes. "I know, but how do we get it? We can't exactly walk into PharmaCorp and ask to see their books." Maria's lips curled into a small, mischievous smile. "No, but I might know someone who can help us get a peek behind the curtain. An old friend who works in corporate security. He owes me a favor." As they planned their next moves, Jake felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. This was bigger than anything he'd ever taken on. But looking at Maria, seeing the rekindled fire in her eyes, he knew they were on the right path. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of covert meetings, late-night stakeouts, and careful evidence gathering. Jake and Maria worked tirelessly, building a network of allies and informants. Dr. Prescott provided invaluable information on the pharmaceutical supply chain. Sarah Thompson connected them with other families affected by the price hikes, each story more heartbreaking than the last. But it was Maria's contact in corporate security who provided the breakthrough they needed. Late one night, in a dimly lit parking garage that felt like something out of a spy movie, he passed them a USB drive. "This is everything I could get without raising flags," he said, his voice low and nervous. "Internal memos, emails, financial records. If there's dirt to be found, it'll be in there." As Jake and Maria pored over the documents, a disturbing picture emerged. PharmaCorp wasn't just raising prices, they were deliberately creating shortages, manipulating the market to justify the hikes. Worse, there were hints of kickbacks to politicians and regulatory officials to look the other way. "This is big, Jake," Maria said, her face pale in the glow of the computer screen. "Bigger than I thought. We're talking potential RICO charges, federal investigations." Jake felt a mix of vindication and dread. They had the evidence they needed, but exposing it would be like kicking a hornet's nest. Powerful people would do anything to keep this quiet. As if on cue, Jake's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Back off, rookie. Some rocks are better left unturned." He showed it to Maria, who frowned deeply. "They know we're onto them. We need to move fast." The next day, as Jake arrived at the precinct, he could feel the change in atmosphere. Colleagues who had been friendly now avoided his gaze. His captain called him into his office, expression grim. "Reynolds, I'm putting you on administrative leave pending an internal investigation," the captain said, not meeting Jake's eyes. "There have been allegations of misconduct." Jake opened his mouth to protest, but Maria's warning echoed in his mind. "Play it cool. Don't show your hand." "Yes, sir," he said stiffly, handing over his badge and gun. As he left the precinct, Jake's mind raced. They were trying to discredit him, to shut down the investigation before it could go public. But he and Maria had prepared for this. The evidence was safely backed up, copies sent to trusted journalists and lawyers. The real fight was just beginning. Jake thought of Sarah Thompson and her son, of all the families struggling to afford life-saving medication. Of the oath he'd taken to protect and serve. Whatever came next, he knew he was on the right side of this battle. As he walked down the steps of the precinct, Jake's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Maria. "It's time. Meet me at the rendezvous point. We're going public." Jake took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. The road ahead would be difficult, but he was ready. The truth had to come out, no matter the cost. The rendezvous point turned out to be a small, nondescript diner on the outskirts of town. As Jake pushed open the door, the bell above jingled softly, drawing a few curious glances from the scattered patrons. He spotted Maria in a corner booth, her face partially hidden behind a large mug of coffee. Sliding into the seat across from her, Jake couldn't help but notice the dark circles under her eyes. "Rough night?" he asked. Maria snorted. "You could say that. Been dodging calls from the captain all morning. Seems our little investigation has ruffled some important feathers." Before Jake could respond, a waitress appeared at their table. "Coffee for you too, hun?" she asked, already reaching for the pot. Jake nodded gratefully, waiting until she'd poured and left before leaning in close. "So, what's the plan? How are we doing this?" Maria pulled out a burner phone, sliding it across the table. "I've set up a meeting with Samantha Chen. She's an investigative reporter with the Millbrook Gazette. Tough as nails and has a reputation for going after corruption. If anyone can break this story wide open, it's her. Jake's eyebrows shot up. The Gazette? Isn't that a bit local for something this big? A wry smile crossed Maria's face. Sometimes the best way to fell a giant is to start small. We break it locally, create a groundswell of public outrage. Makes it harder for the bigger outlets to ignore. As they discussed strategy, Jake couldn't shake a gnawing feeling of unease. Maria, he said hesitantly, are you sure about this? Once we go public, there's no going back. Our careers. Maria's expression softened. Jake, I've got maybe a year left before retirement. But you're just starting out. I need to know you understand what you're risking here. Jake thought about Sarah Thompson and her son, about all the families struggling to afford life-saving medication. He thought about the oath he'd taken, about justice and doing what's right. I'm sure, he said firmly. Whatever happens, I know we're doing the right thing. The meeting with Samantha Chen was set for later that afternoon. As they left the diner, Jake couldn't shake the feeling they were being watched. He scanned the parking lot, noting a dark sedan with tinted windows idling nearby. Don't react, Maria murmured, having noticed it too. Let's split up. I'll take the long way round, make sure we're not followed. As Jake walked briskly towards his car, his heart pounding, he realized just how deep they were in. This wasn't just a local story anymore. They were taking on powerful forces, and those forces were starting to push back. The Millbrook Gazette's offices were housed in an old converted warehouse, all exposed brick and large windows. Jake found himself fidgeting nervously in the reception area, acutely aware of his casual clothes, a far cry from his usual uniform. Samantha Chen burst into the room like a whirlwind, all sharp angles and focused energy. Officer Reynolds? She asked, extending a hand. Samantha Chen, let's talk in my office. As they settled into her cluttered workspace, Samantha fixed Jake with an intense stare. Detective Sanchez gave me a brief overview, but I need to hear it from you. What exactly are we dealing with here? For the next hour, Jake laid out everything they'd uncovered. The predatory acquisitions by PharmaCorp, the artificial shortages, the price gouging, the hints of political corruption. Samantha listened intently, occasionally interjecting with sharp questions that revealed her quick mind and deep understanding of corporate malfeasance. This is dynamite, she said when Jake finished, leaning back in her chair. But you understand the risks, right? PharmaCorp has deep pockets and an army of lawyers. They'll come at us with everything they've got. Jake nodded solemnly. I know, but people are suffering. They're choosing between medication and food. It has to stop. Samantha studied him for a long moment, then nodded decisively. All right, I'm in. But we do this my way. We need to make this story bulletproof. Every claim backed up with hard evidence. And we need human faces to make people care. Can you get me in touch with some of the affected families? As they hammered out the details, Jake felt a mix of relief and trepidation. They were committed now. There was no turning back. Leaving the Gazette's offices, Jake's phone buzzed with a text from Maria. We've got trouble. Meet me at the safe house. Now, the safe house was actually Maria's cousin's cabin, a small, rustic structure nestled in the woods outside of town. As Jake pulled up, he saw Maria's car already there, along with another he didn't recognize. Inside, he found Maria deep in conversation with Dr. Prescott, the pharmacist who had first tipped them off. The doctor looked pale and shaken. Jake, Maria said, relief evident in her voice. Good, you're here. We've got a problem, Doctor. Prescott looked up, his eyes haunted. They know, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. PharmaCorp knows we're onto them. I got a visit from some very unpleasant men this morning. They made it clear that if I didn't keep my mouth shut, there would be consequences. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Did they threaten you? Prescott nodded miserably. Not just me, my family. They knew things. Details about my kids, schools, my wife's routine. These aren't people who make idle threats. Maria's jaw clenched. This changes things. We need to move faster, get protective details for our key witnesses. As they strategized late into the night, the weight of what they were up against settled heavily on Jake's shoulders. This wasn't just about exposing corruption anymore. They were putting people's lives at risk. The faces of Sarah Thompson and her son Tommy flashed in his mind. Were they in danger too? Just before dawn, as they were wrapping up, Jake's phone rang. The caller ID showed it was Samantha Chen. "Jake," her voice was urgent, "I need you to come to the office right now. Someone left a package for you. You're going to want to see this." The sun was just peeking over the horizon as Jake rushed into the Gazette's offices. Samantha met him at the door, her face grim. Without a word, she led him to a conference room where a large box sat on the table. "It was delivered about an hour ago," she explained. "No return address, but your name was on it." Jake approached cautiously, half expecting it to explode. Carefully, he opened the lid. Inside was a stack of documents, a USB drive, and a note that simply read, "The truth will out." As they began to sift through the contents, Jake's eyes widened. This was everything they needed and more. Internal memos detailing the price-fixing scheme, emails discussing political bribes, financial records showing the true extent of the corruption. "This is it," Samantha breathed, her reporter's instincts on fire. "This is the smoking gun." Jake nodded, his mind racing. But who sent it, and why now? Before Samantha could respond, Jake's phone buzzed with a news alert. His blood ran cold as he read the headline. "Local pharmacist found dead in apparent suicide." "Doctor." Prescott's face stared back at him from the screen. Jake felt the room spin, guilt and anger warring in his chest. They had pushed too hard, moved too fast, and now an innocent man had paid the price. But as the initial shock wore off, determination set in. They couldn't back down now. "Doctor." Prescott's death couldn't be in vain. The truth had to come out, no matter the cost. "We need to go public now," Jake said, his voice hard with resolve. "No more waiting. It's time to blow this thing wide open." Samantha nodded, already reaching for her laptop. "I'll have the story ready for the morning edition." "But Jake, once this hits the press, all hell is going to break loose. Are you ready for that?" Jake thought of Sarah Thompson and her son, of Dr. Prescott and his family, of all the lives ruined by corporate greed. He thought of the oath he'd taken to protect and serve. "I'm ready," he said firmly. "Let's make them pay." As the first light of dawn broke over Millbrook, Jake Reynolds stood at the precipice of a storm that would shake the foundations of power. The real battle was just beginning. The next 24 hours passed in a whirlwind of activity. Jake barely slept, his mind racing with the implications of what they were about to unleash. He coordinated with Maria to ensure the safety of their key witnesses, including Sarah Thompson and her son. They were moved to a secure location, protected by officers they trusted implicitly. As the sun rose on what promised to be a pivotal day, Jake found himself standing outside the Millbrook Gazette's offices, watching the first edition roll off the presses. The headline screamed in bold letters, "Pharma corruption exposed. Local cop uncovers massive price-fixing scheme." Samantha Chen appeared beside him, dark circles under her eyes betraying her own sleepless night. "It's done," she said softly. "No going back now." Jake nodded, a mixture of determination and apprehension churning in his gut. "How long before it hits the stands?" "An hour, maybe less," Samantha replied. "We're also pushing it out online and to our media partners. By noon, it'll be national news." As if on cue, Jake's phone began to buzz incessantly. Calls from unknown numbers, text messages flooding in. He silenced it, knowing that the storm was about to break. "You should get somewhere safe," he told Samantha. "Once this breaks, they'll be coming for both of us." Samantha's eyes flashed with defiance. "I'm not hiding, Jake. This is what I do. I'll be right here, following up on leads, pushing the story forward." Jake couldn't help but admire her courage. "Just be careful, okay? These people don't play by the rules." As he left the Gazette, Jake could feel the shift in the air. People on the streets were huddled over their phones, expressions of shock and anger spreading across faces. Car radios blared with breaking news bulletins. The truth was out, and Millbrook would never be the same. Jake's first stop was the police station. As he walked through the doors, a hush fell over the bullpen. Colleagues he'd known for years looked at him with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. Some nodded in respect, others quickly averted their gaze. Captain Brannigan's voice boomed from his office. "Reynolds, get in here, now." Steeling himself, Jake entered the captain's office. Brannigan's face was a thundercloud of emotion, anger, disappointment, and something else. Fear? "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Brannigan hissed, slamming a copy of the Gazette on his desk. The mayor's been calling non-stop. The FBI is on their way. This department is about to be turned inside out. Jake stood his ground. With all due respect, sir, we uncovered a massive criminal conspiracy. Isn't that our job? Brannigan deflated slightly, sinking into his chair. It's not that simple, Jake. There are powerful people involved. People who can make our lives very difficult. So we just look the other way? Jake countered. Let people suffer because it's inconvenient to do the right thing? Before Brannigan could respond, a commotion erupted in the bullpen. Jake turned to see a team of FBI agents striding through, flashing badges and issuing orders. A stern-faced woman in a crisp suit approached. Officer Jake Reynolds? I'm Special Agent Diane Harper, FBI. We need to talk. The next few hours were a blur of intense questioning. Jake laid out everything they'd uncovered, providing copies of evidence and names of witnesses. Agent Harper's expression remained impassive, but Jake could sense her growing realization of the scale of what they were dealing with. You've kicked over a hornet's nest, Officer Reynolds, she said finally. This goes beyond just Pharma Corp. We're looking at potential involvement from high-level government officials, regulatory agencies. It's going to get ugly. Jake nodded grimly. I know. But it had to be done. Agent Harper studied him for a long moment. You're either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish. Possibly both. But you've done good work here. We'll take it from here. As Jake left the interrogation room, he was met by Maria. Her face was a mask of concern. Jake, we've got a problem. Sarah Thompson and her son, they're gone. Jake felt his blood run cold. What do you mean, gone? They were under protection. Maria shook her head, frustration evident. They slipped away somehow. Left a note saying they couldn't put others at risk. We've got people out looking, but... Before Jake could respond, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. If you want to see the Thompsons alive again, come alone to the old Miller factory. You have 1 hour. Jake's mind raced. It was obviously a trap, but he couldn't risk Sarah and Tommy's lives. He showed the message to Maria. Jake, no, she said firmly. We need to bring in the FBI, set up a proper operation. But Jake was already moving towards the door. There's no time. If I don't show, they might hurt them. I have to go. Then I'm coming with you, Maria insisted. Jake shook his head. The message said alone. I can't risk it. But I need you to do something for me. If I'm not back in 2 hours, give this to Agent Harper. He handed her a sealed envelope. It's everything. Names, dates, bank accounts, insurance, in case something happens to me. Maria's eyes widened in understanding. Jake, this is suicide. Please, let's think this through. But Jake was already halfway out the door, his mind made up. As he drove towards the abandoned factory, his thoughts whirled with possibilities. Who had taken Sarah and Tommy? Pharma Corp thugs? Corrupt cops? He knew he was walking into danger, but he had no choice. The old Miller factory loomed before him, a hulking relic of Millbrook's more prosperous past. Jake parked a block away, approaching on foot, every sense on high alert. The surrounding area was eerily quiet, devoid of the usual urban ambience. As he neared the main entrance, a voice called out from the shadows. That's far enough, Officer Reynolds. Hands where we can see them. 2 men emerged, their faces hidden by ski masks. One held a gun trained steadily on Jake's chest. Where are Sarah and Tommy? Jake demanded. Safe, for now, the gunman replied. Whether they stay that way depends on you. Our employer would like to have a word. Jake was led deeper into the factory, through rusted machinery and crumbling walls. Finally, they entered what must have been an old office. Seated behind a desk was a face Jake recognized from news reports and company websites. Philip Greedman, CEO of Pharma Corp. Officer Reynolds, Greedman said, his voice oily smooth. I believe we have some matters to discuss. Jake's fists clenched at his sides. Where are they? Greedman waved a hand dismissively. The woman and her boy are unharmed. For now, their continued well-being depends entirely on our conversation. What do you want? Jake growled. Want? I want you to understand the gravity of your mistake. Greedman leaned forward, his eyes cold. You've disrupted a very delicate ecosystem, Officer Reynolds. One that provides stability, jobs, and yes, profits. Did you ever stop to consider the broader implications of your little crusade? Jake stood his ground. You mean did I consider that exposing your criminal conspiracy might hurt your bottom line? No, I was too busy thinking about all the people suffering because they can't afford medication. Griedmann's face hardened. Idealism. How quaint. Let me be clear, officer. You have a choice to make. You can walk out of here, issue a statement retracting your claims, cite misleading evidence. Do that, and this all goes away. The Thompsons go free, your career remains intact. Or what? Jake challenged. Or accidents happen, Griedmann said coldly. To you, to the Thompsons, to anyone else involved in this misguided endeavor. You've made powerful enemies, Officer Reynolds. Think carefully about your next move. Jake's mind raced. He knew he was in over his head, but he couldn't back down now. Too much was at stake. And then, almost imperceptibly, he caught a flicker of movement outside the office window. A flash of a familiar face. Maria. In that moment, Jake made his decision. He lunged across the desk, tackling Griedmann to the ground. The room erupted into chaos. Gunshots rang out, glass shattered, and suddenly the air was filled with shouts of FBI. Freeze. As the dust settled, Jake found himself hauled to his feet by Agent Harper. Griedmann and his men were being cuffed and led away. And there, in the doorway, stood Maria, a triumphant smile on her face. Didn't think I'd let you do this alone, did you, partner? She said. Jake's relief was palpable. Sarah and Tommy? Safe, Maria assured him. We found them locked in a storage room. They're being checked out by paramedics now. As Jake was led outside, he saw Samantha Chen pushing through a crowd of reporters, her eyes alight with the biggest story of her career. FBI agents swarmed the area, collecting evidence and securing the scene. Agent Harper approached, her expression a mix of admiration and exasperation. That was incredibly reckless, Officer Reynolds. But it got the job done. We've got Griedmann on tape making threats and admitting to the conspiracy. Combined with the evidence you've already provided, it's enough to bring down the whole operation. Jake nodded, exhaustion finally catching up with him. So what happens now? Harper's lips quirked in a small smile. Now the real work begins. We've got a lot of threads to pull, a lot of powerful people to bring to justice. But thanks to you, we've got a place to start. As the sun began to set over Millbrook, Jake Reynolds watched as Griedmann was led away in handcuffs. He thought about Sarah and Tommy, about all the families who would now have a fighting chance. He thought about the long road ahead, the battles still to be fought. But for now, in this moment, he allowed himself to feel the weight of what they'd accomplished. They had taken on Goliath and won. The truth was out, and nothing would ever be the same. As the adrenaline of the confrontation at the Miller factory began to fade, the true magnitude of what had transpired started to sink in. Jake found himself swept up in a whirlwind of debriefings, press conferences, and legal proceedings. The story had exploded beyond Millbrook, dominating national headlines and sending shockwaves through the pharmaceutical industry and political circles. Jake sat in a nondescript conference room at the FBI field office, his eyes heavy from lack of sleep. Agent Harper paced the room, her phone constantly buzzing with updates. The Attorney General is personally overseeing the case now, she informed Jake, her voice a mix of excitement and trepidation. We're looking at RICO charges, securities fraud, bribery of public officials. The list goes on. This could be one of the biggest corporate takedowns in history. Jake nodded, trying to process it all. What about Sarah and Tommy? Are they safe? Harper's expression softened slightly. They're in protective custody. We've got them in a safe house outside the city. They'll likely be key witnesses in the trials to come. The mention of trials made Jake's stomach churn. He knew that this was far from over. The evidence they had gathered was damning, but PharmaCorp and its allies wouldn't go down without a fight. As if reading his thoughts, Harper continued, I won't sugarcoat it, Reynolds. The road ahead is going to be tough. These people have deep pockets and a lot to lose. They'll try to discredit you, to paint you as a rogue cop with a vendetta. Are you prepared for that? Jake met her gaze steadily. I knew what I was getting into when I started this. Whatever they throw at me, it's worth it if it means justice for the people they've hurt. Harper nodded approvingly. Good, because we're going to need you. Your testimony, your first-hand knowledge of how this all unfolded, it's crucial. As they continued to discuss strategy, Jake's phone buzzed with a message from Maria. Turn on the news. Now, Excusing himself, Jake stepped out into the hallway and pulled up a news live stream on his phone. His eyes widened as he saw Philip Griedman, looking haggard but defiant, standing at a podium surrounded by a team of lawyers. "Categorically deny all allegations of wrongdoing," Griedman was saying, his voice dripping with rehearsed sincerity. Pharma Corp has always operated within the bounds of the law, with the sole aim of providing life-saving medications to those in need. These baseless accusations are nothing more than a witch hunt, driven by anti-business sentiment and perpetrated by a disgruntled police officer with a history of insubordination. Jake felt his blood boil as Griedman continued to spin his web of lies. But what came next hit him like a punch to the gut. Furthermore, Griedman announced, "We have evidence that Officer Jake Reynolds, the so-called whistleblower, in this case, has been accepting bribes from our competitors. We will be providing this evidence to the appropriate authorities and calling for a full investigation into his conduct." The press conference erupted into chaos, reporters shouting questions as Griedman was whisked away by his legal team. Jake stood frozen, his mind reeling. He knew it was a lie, a desperate attempt to discredit him, but the implications were staggering. Agent Harper appeared at his side, her face grim. "We need to get ahead of this," she said urgently. "Come on, we're going to have to make a statement." The next few hours were a blur of strategy sessions and carefully worded press releases. Jake found himself standing before a sea of cameras, his voice steady as he refuted Griedman's claims and reaffirmed his commitment to the truth. "I have never accepted a bribe or engaged in any unethical behavior," he stated firmly. "These accusations are a desperate attempt to distract from the real issue, the systematic exploitation of vulnerable people for corporate profit. I stand by every piece of evidence we've uncovered, and I'm confident that the truth will prevail." As he stepped away from the podium, Jake felt a mix of exhaustion and resolve. He knew that this was just the beginning of what promised to be a long and bitter fight. Back at the Millbrook Police Department, Jake found a very different atmosphere from the tension of his last visit. Officers who had previously avoided his gaze now approached with words of support and admiration. Captain Brannigan called him into his office, his demeanor markedly changed. "Jake," he began, looking uncomfortable, "I owe you an apology. I should have backed you up from the start. It's just the pressure from above, you know how it is." Jake nodded, understanding all too well the complex web of politics and power that often entangled law enforcement. Brannigan continued, "I want you to know that you have the full support of this department moving forward. Whatever you need, we've got your back." The captain's words were reassuring, but Jake couldn't shake a lingering sense of unease. He knew that the corruption they were fighting ran deep, and he couldn't be certain who to trust. As he left the station, Jake was met by Samantha Chen, the fire of investigative passion burning in her eyes. "Jake," she said breathlessly, "I've been digging into Griedman's claim about the bribes. I think I know where it's coming from." She pulled out her tablet, showing Jake a series of financial records. "There were deposits made to an account in your name. But look at the dates, they all correspond with undercover operations you were part of last year. I think someone's taken your legitimate undercover work and is trying to spin it as evidence of bribery." Jake's mind raced, connecting the dots. "The West Side drug bust," he murmured. "We had to set up accounts to infiltrate the money laundering operation. But how did Griedman get access to that information?" Samantha's expression was grim. "That's the million-dollar question. And it suggests that the corruption might go even deeper than we thought. Someone with access to sealed police records is working with Pharma Corp." The implications were staggering. Jake realized that they weren't just fighting a corporation anymore. They were up against a network that had tentacles reaching into law enforcement itself. As night fell over Millbrook, Jake found himself standing on the roof of his apartment building, looking out over the city he had sworn to protect. The lights twinkled below, each one representing a life that had been touched by this case in some way. He thought about Sarah and Tommy, about Dr. Prescott, who had paid the ultimate price for trying to do the right thing. He thought about all the families struggling to afford medication, about the lives that hung in the balance. The weight of responsibility settled heavily on his shoulders. He had started this fight, and now he had to see it through, no matter the personal cost. His phone buzzed with a message from Maria. "You okay, partner?" "This thing's getting crazy." Jake typed back a reply. "It's bigger than we thought. But we can't back down now. Too much at stake." As he hit send, Jake made a silent vow to himself and to the city spread out before him. No matter what came next, the legal battles, the smear campaigns, the threats to his safety and career, he would not rest until justice was served. The cool night air carried the faint sounds of the city. Sirens in the distance, the hum of traffic, the occasional burst of laughter from a nearby restaurant. It was a reminder of the life and vitality that pulsed through Millbrook, the very essence of what he was fighting to protect. Jake took a deep breath, steeling himself for the challenges ahead. He knew that the coming days, weeks, and perhaps even months would test him in ways he had never been tested before. But he also knew that he wasn't alone in this fight. He thought of Maria's unwavering support, of Samantha's relentless pursuit of the truth, of Agent Harper's determination to see justice done. He thought of the countless citizens who had reached out with messages of support and their own stories of struggling against an unjust system. As he turned to head back inside, Jake caught sight of his reflection in the window. He saw fatigue in his eyes, yes, but also a fire that burned brighter than ever. This was what it meant to be a true guardian of the people, to stand up against injustice no matter the odds. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new revelations, and undoubtedly new attempts to derail their efforts. But for now, in this moment, Jake allowed himself to feel a glimmer of hope. The truth was out there, and together, they would bring it to light. With renewed determination, Jake Reynolds stepped back into his apartment, ready to face whatever the dawn might bring. The battle for Millbrook's soul, and for the principles of justice and fairness, was far from over. But with every step, every revelation, they were moving closer to a reckoning that would shake the foundations of power and bring hope to those who had long been voiceless. The night settled over Millbrook, a city on the brink of transformation. And at the heart of it all, a dedicated police officer turned unlikely hero, prepared to risk everything in the pursuit of what was right. As dawn broke over Millbrook, Jake found himself back at the FBI field office, surrounded by a team of agents and analysts poring over mountains of evidence. The room buzzed with activity, screens displaying financial records, email chains, and surveillance footage. Agent Harper approached, coffee in hand. "We've made some progress overnight," she said, her voice low. "We've identified several key players in PharmaCorp's network of influence. Politicians, regulators, even a few judges. The web of corruption is more extensive than we initially thought." Jake nodded grimly. "What about the leak in the police department? Any leads on who might have accessed my undercover files?" Harper's expression tightened. "We're working on it. We've got a team combing through access logs, but whoever did this was careful. They knew how to cover their tracks." As they discussed strategy, Jake's phone buzzed with a news alert. His stomach dropped as he read the headline: "Whistleblower Cop's Credibility Questioned, Past Disciplinary Issues Revealed." He quickly scanned the article, his frown deepening with each paragraph. The piece dredged up every minor infraction from his career, painting a picture of a reckless, insubordinate officer with a chip on his shoulder. "They're trying to discredit me," Jake muttered, showing the article to Harper. She skimmed it quickly, her lips pressed into a thin line. "It's a classic tactic. They can't refute the evidence, so they're attacking the messenger. We need to get ahead of this narrative." Before they could discuss further, a commotion erupted near the entrance of the office. Jake turned to see Maria burst in, her face flushed with urgency. "Jake," she called out, pushing past startled agents. "We've got a problem. Sarah Thompson just called me. Someone tried to break into the safe house last night." Jake felt his blood run cold. "Are they okay?" Maria nodded. "They're fine. The security detail thwarted the attempt. But Jake, this is escalating. They're getting desperate." Harper was already on her phone, barking orders to increase security and relocate the Thompsons. Jake ran a hand through his hair, the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. "We need to move faster," he said, determination hardening his voice. "Every day we wait, they're finding new ways to cover their tracks and intimidate witnesses." Harper ended her call, turning to Jake with a serious expression. "I agree, which is why we're accelerating our timeline. We're planning a coordinated series of raids and arrests, hitting multiple targets simultaneously. But for this to work, we need rock-solid evidence and testimony." Jake straightened, understanding the implication. "What do you need from me?" "Everything," Harper replied. "Every detail, every conversation, every hunch. We need to build an airtight case." For the next several hours, Jake found himself reliving every moment of the investigation, from his first encounter with Sarah Thompson to the confrontation with Griedman. He pored over documents, identified key players in surveillance photos, and helped connect dots that the FBI agents might have missed. As the day wore on, Samantha Chen arrived, armed with new information from her own sources. "I've been digging into PharmaCorp's political donations," she explained, spreading out a series of documents. "There's a pattern here. Every time they were about to push through a price hike or a questionable merger, there was a spike in contributions to key committee members." The team huddled around, examining the evidence. Jake felt a surge of gratitude for Samantha's relentless pursuit of the truth. Her journalistic instincts had proven invaluable time and time again. As night fell, the atmosphere in the office was one of tense anticipation. Plans were being finalized, warrants drawn up, and teams assembled. Jake knew that the next 24 hours would be crucial. Just as they were wrapping up, Jake's phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown number. Warily, he answered. Officer Reynolds, a distorted voice greeted him. "I hope you're prepared for what's coming. You've kicked a hornet's nest, and the swarm is about to descend." Jake's jaw clenched. "Who is this?" "Let's just say I'm someone who appreciates the work you're doing," the voice replied. "But you need to understand the forces you're up against. They'll stop at nothing to protect their interests." "Why are you telling me this?" Jake demanded. There was a pause on the other end. "Because sometimes the system needs to be shaken up from the inside." "But be careful, Officer Reynolds. Not everyone involved in this is as black and white as you might think. Look closer to home." The line went dead. Jake stared at his phone, mind racing. He quickly relayed the conversation to Harper and Maria. "Could be a trap," Maria mused. "Trying to make us doubt each other." Harper nodded in agreement. "Or it could be a genuine whistleblower within PharmaCorp or one of the regulatory agencies. Either way, we can't let it distract us from the task at hand." As the team dispersed to make final preparations for the upcoming operation, Jake found a quiet corner to collect his thoughts. He couldn't shake the caller's warning to look closer to home. Was there something he was missing? Someone he had overlooked? His reverie was interrupted by a gentle hand on his shoulder. He looked up to see Samantha, concern etched on her face. "You okay?" she asked softly. Jake managed a weak smile. "Just trying to process everything. It's all happening so fast." Samantha nodded understandingly. "You've started something big here, Jake. Something important. No matter what happens next, remember that." Her words bolstered his resolve. Jake stood, squaring his shoulders. "You're right, we can't back down now. Too many people are counting on us." As they walked back to join the others, Jake felt a renewed sense of purpose. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever attempts were made to derail their efforts, he knew they were on the right side of history. The next morning dawned clear and crisp. Jake stood with Agent Harper and a team of FBI agents, preparing to execute the first of many search warrants. The target, a high-level executive at PharmaCorp suspected of orchestrating the bribery scheme. As they approached the luxurious suburban home, Jake couldn't help but reflect on the contrast between this opulent lifestyle and the struggling families he'd encountered throughout the investigation. "FBI, we have a warrant," Harper's voice rang out as they reached the front door. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. The door burst open, but instead of the executive they expected, they were met by a team of lawyers, armed with injunctions and stay orders. "This warrant is being contested," the lead lawyer announced smugly. "You have no authority to search these premises." Jake watched in disbelief as Harper argued with the lawyers. It was clear that PharmaCorp had been tipped off, prepared for this very moment. As they were forced to retreat, Jake's phone buzzed with messages from other teams. Similar scenes were playing out across the city. Targets had vanished, evidence had disappeared, and legal roadblocks had been erected at every turn. Back at the field office, the mood was one of frustration and disbelief. Jake paced the room, anger simmering beneath the surface. "How did they know?" he demanded. "We were so careful." Unless, the realization hit him like a thunderbolt. The leak, the warning to look closer to home. Somehow, someone with intimate knowledge of their operation had tipped off PharmaCorp. As Jake shared his suspicions with Harper and Maria, a grim determination settled over the group. They had been outmaneuvered this time, but the fight was far from over. "We need to flush out the mole," Harper declared. And we need to do it without tipping our hand. Jake nodded, his mind already formulating a plan. I think I have an idea. But it's risky. We'll need to feed false information, see where it leads. As they huddled to discuss strategy, Jake couldn't shake a sense of foreboding. The battle lines were clearly drawn now, and the stakes had never been higher. Millbrook had become ground zero in a war against corporate greed and corruption. Looking around at the determined faces of his allies, Jake felt a glimmer of hope. They had been knocked down, but they weren't out. Not by a long shot. All right, he said, his voice steady. Let's show these bastards what happens when you underestimate the power of the truth. The room buzzed with renewed energy as they set to work, ready to take the fight to the next level. The setback had only strengthened their resolve. PharmaCorp and its allies had won this round, but Jake Reynolds and his team were just getting started. The following days were a delicate dance of misinformation and careful observation. Jake, Maria, and Agent Harper crafted a series of false leads and planted them strategically throughout their network. They watched and waited, hoping to catch a glimpse of the mole in action. Jake found himself in a constant state of hypervigilance, scrutinizing every interaction, every passing comment from his colleagues. The strain was beginning to show, dark circles forming under his eyes, his normally neat appearance becoming slightly disheveled. It was during a late-night strategy session that the first breakthrough came. A junior FBI agent burst into the room, his face flushed with excitement. "We've got something," he announced, laying out a series of documents. "One of the false leads we planted about a secret offshore account? It just showed up in a subpoena filed by PharmaCorp's lawyers." The room erupted into a flurry of activity. Agent Harper leaned over the documents, her brow furrowed in concentration. "This is it. The information in this subpoena was only shared with a select few. We've narrowed down our list of suspects." Jake felt a mix of relief and trepidation. They were close to identifying the mole, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. As if to confirm his fears, Samantha Chen burst into the room, her face pale. "Jake, you need to see this," she said, thrusting her tablet towards him. On the screen was a leaked memo, purportedly from the Attorney General's office, suggesting that the case against PharmaCorp was being dropped due to lack of credible evidence. "It's all over social media," Samantha explained. "PharmaCorp's PR team is having a field day. They're painting this as vindication." Jake's fists clenched at his sides. "It's fake," he growled. "It has to be. Harper, can you confirm?" Agent Harper was already on the phone, her voice tense as she spoke with her superiors in Washington. After a few minutes of heated conversation, she turned to the group, her expression grim. "The memo is fake," she confirmed. "But the damage is already being done. Public opinion is shifting. We're being portrayed as overzealous witch hunters." The room fell into a tense silence, the weight of the setback settling heavily on everyone's shoulders. It was Maria who finally broke the quiet, her voice filled with determination. "So we fight back," she said firmly. "We've got the truth on our side. We just need to find a way to get it out there, to counter their narrative." Jake nodded, an idea forming. "Samantha," he turned to the journalist, "how quickly can you put together a comprehensive story? Not just about PharmaCorp, but about everything we've uncovered, the political connections, the regulatory capture, all of it." Samantha's eyes lit up with understanding. "Give me 48 hours. I'll need access to everything you've got." Agent Harper looked skeptical. "Are you sure about this? Releasing that much information could jeopardize our case." "We don't have a choice," Jake argued. "They're controlling the narrative. If we don't act now, we might not get another chance." After a moment of consideration, Harper nodded her assent. "All right, but we do this carefully. Every piece of information needs to be vetted. We can't give them any ammunition to discredit us further." The next 2 days were a whirlwind of activity. Jake, Maria, and the FBI team worked tirelessly to compile and verify information, while Samantha crafted a narrative that would captivate the public's attention. As they worked, another piece of the puzzle fell into place. One of the false leads they had planted, about a secret meeting between PharmaCorp executives and corrupt regulators, had been accessed from a computer within the Millbrook Police Department. Jake felt a cold knot form in his stomach as he realized the implications. The mole wasn't just in law enforcement, they were in his own department. With this new information, Jake and Maria began to quietly investigate their colleagues, looking for any signs of unusual behavior or unexplained financial windfalls. Their search led them to an unexpected suspect, Officer Tom Brennan, a veteran cop who had always seemed above reproach. But as they dug deeper, they uncovered a trail of encrypted communications and suspicious bank transfers. The night before Samantha's story was set to break, Jake and Maria confronted Brennan in the empty police station parking lot. "We know, Tom," Jake said quietly, his heart heavy with disappointment. "We know you've been feeding information to PharmaCorp." Brennan's face crumpled, a mix of shame and defiance in his eyes. "You don't understand," he pleaded. "They have my daughter. She needs specialized medication that costs thousands a month. They promised to take care of her if I helped them." Jake felt a surge of empathy, even as his resolve hardened. This was exactly the kind of desperate situation PharmaCorp had been exploiting, turning good people into unwilling accomplices. "We can protect her," Maria assured Brennan, "but we need your help. We need you to come clean, to tell us everything you know." After a moment of tense silence, Brennan nodded, tears forming in his eyes. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay, I'll tell you everything." As dawn broke over Millbrook, Samantha Chen's expose hit the internet like a bombshell. The story was a masterpiece of investigative journalism, laying out in meticulous detail the full extent of PharmaCorp's corruption and the human cost of their greed. The article was accompanied by heart-wrenching personal stories from families like the Thompsons, as well as damning testimony from whistleblowers within the pharmaceutical industry and regulatory agencies. Social media exploded with reactions. #PharmaCorruption and #Justice for Millbrook began trending nationwide. News networks scrambled to cover the story, with pundits and experts weighing in around the clock. In the midst of the media frenzy, Jake received a call from an unknown number. It was the same distorted voice that had warned him days earlier. "Well done, Officer Reynolds," the voice said. "But be prepared. This is where the real fight begins." As if on cue, Jake's phone began buzzing with notifications. PharmaCorp had issued a statement denouncing the libelous and unfounded accusations, and promising swift legal action against Samantha Chen and the Millbrook Gazette. But it wasn't just PharmaCorp reacting. Politicians implicated in the scandal were calling emergency press conferences. Regulatory agencies were announcing internal investigations. The stock market was in turmoil as pharmaceutical companies saw their share prices plummet. In the eye of this storm, Jake stood with his allies, Maria, Samantha, Agent Harper, and the countless others who had risked everything to bring the truth to light. "What now?" Maria asked, her voice a mix of excitement and apprehension. Jake took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. "Now we press our advantage. We've got them on the ropes. It's time to deliver the knockout blow." As they prepared for the next phase of their fight, Jake couldn't help but feel a sense of cautious optimism. They had faced seemingly insurmountable odds, weathered attacks on their credibility, and exposed a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of power. But he knew the war was far from over. PharmaCorp and its allies would fight back with everything they had. The coming days and weeks would test their resolve like never before. Looking at the determined faces around him, Jake felt a surge of pride and determination. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. For the sake of Sarah and Tommy Thompson, for Officer Brennan's daughter, and for countless others suffering under a broken system, they would see this through to the end. The battle for Millbrook's soul had become a battle for the very heart of American justice. And Jake Reynolds, the unlikely crusader at the center of it all, was ready to lead the charge. As the sun rose higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the city, Jake allowed himself a moment of reflection. From that first encounter with Sarah Thompson in the pharmacy to this moment of national reckoning, it had been a journey he could never have imagined. But standing here now, on the precipice of real, systemic change, he knew that every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt had been worth it. With renewed determination, Jake turned to his team. "Let's get to work," he said. "We've got a long way to go, but together, we can make this right." And with that, they plunged back into the fray, ready to write the next chapter in their fight for justice. The aftermath of Samantha's expose was nothing short of seismic. Millbrook found itself thrust into the national spotlight, becoming ground zero for a nationwide debate on corporate accountability and healthcare reform. News vans lined the streets, reporters clamoring for interviews with Jake, Maria, and anyone else connected to the case. Jake, however, had little time to bask in the media attention. He was laser-focused on the next phase of their strategy, turning public outrage into concrete action. In a secure conference room at the FBI field office, Jake stood before a wall covered in photos, documents, and connecting strings, a visual representation of the vast conspiracy they had uncovered. "We've exposed the problem," he addressed the assembled team, which now included federal prosecutors and officials from multiple regulatory agencies. "Now we need to make sure justice is served, not just for PharmaCorp, but for every politician, regulator, and corrupt official who enabled this to happen." Agent Harper nodded in agreement. "We're coordinating with offices across the country. This goes way beyond Millbrook. We're looking at a nationwide operation." As they discussed strategy, Jake's phone buzzed with a message from Samantha. "Turn on the news." Now, grabbing a remote, Jake flipped on the large screen in the conference room. The image that filled the screen made his blood run cold. Philip Griedman, CEO of PharmaCorp, was standing at a podium, his face a mask of righteous indignation. "These baseless accusations are nothing more than a coordinated attack on the very companies working tirelessly to develop life-saving medications," Griedman declared, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "We categorically deny any wrongdoing and are prepared to defend ourselves vigorously in court." But it was what came next that truly shocked Jake and his team. Furthermore, Griedman continued, "We have evidence that Officer Jake Reynolds, the so-called hero of this witch hunt, has been working in coordination with our competitors to undermine PharmaCorp and manipulate the market. We will be presenting this evidence to the appropriate authorities and calling for a full investigation into his actions." The room erupted into a cacophony of voices, shock and outrage mingling in the air. Jake stood frozen, his mind racing. He knew it was a lie, a desperate attempt to discredit him, but the implications were staggering. Maria was the first to reach his side, her face a mix of concern and determination. "It's a bluff, Jake. They're desperate. We can't let this throw us off." Agent Harper was already on the phone, her voice tense as she spoke with her superiors in Washington. After a heated conversation, she turned to the group, her expression grim. "They're pushing for an internal investigation," she reported. "It's protocol when allegations like this are made. Jake, I'm sorry, but you'll need to step back from the case until this is cleared up." Jake felt as if the floor had dropped out from under him. Everything they had worked for, all the progress they had made, was suddenly in jeopardy. But as he looked around the room, at the faces of his allies and the evidence of their investigation surrounding them, a steely resolve settled over him. "No," he said firmly, surprising even himself with the strength in his voice. "I'm not stepping back. We're too close to let them derail us now." Harper opened her mouth to protest, but Jake pressed on. "Listen, we knew they'd fight dirty. This is just proof that we've got them scared. We need to push harder, not back down." A tense silence fell over the room as everyone considered his words. It was Maria who finally broke it, stepping forward to stand beside Jake. "He's right," she declared. "If we falter now, they win. We've come too far to let that happen." Slowly, nods of agreement spread through the room. Even Harper, after a moment's hesitation, gave a curt nod. "All right," she said, "but we do this by the book. Every move we make needs to be above reproach. We can't give them any ammunition to use against us." With renewed determination, the team set to work. They knew that PharmaCorp's counterattack was just the beginning. The coming days would be crucial in shaping public opinion and maintaining the momentum of their investigation. Jake found himself working around the clock, coordinating with Samantha to counter PharmaCorp's narrative in the media, while also diving deeper into the evidence they had gathered. Every lead was pursued, every connection scrutinized. It was during one of these late-night investigation sessions that Jake made a breakthrough. Buried in a mountain of financial records was a series of transactions that didn't quite add up. Following the money trail led him to a startling discovery: a network of shell companies used to funnel money from PharmaCorp to key decision-makers in the FDA. "This is it," Jake breathed, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten. "This is the smoking gun we've been looking for." As he presented his findings to the team the next morning, a sense of excitement filled the room. This was the concrete evidence they needed to tie everything together. But their elation was short-lived. Just as they were preparing to move on this new information, Jake received an urgent call from Sarah Thompson. "Jake," her voice was trembling with fear. "They're here. Men in suits. They're saying they have a court order to take Tommy for emergency medical evaluation. I don't know what to do. Jake's blood ran cold. This was a new low, even for Pharma Corp. They were using Sarah and Tommy as pawns to apply pressure. Stay calm, he assured her, even as his own heart raced. I'm on my way. Don't let them take Tommy anywhere. Hanging up, Jake quickly briefed the team. I have to go. This is personal now. As he raced towards the safe house where Sarah and Tommy were staying, Jake's mind whirled with possibilities. He knew this was likely a trap, an attempt to catch him acting improperly and further discredit him. But he couldn't abandon Sarah and Tommy. They had become more than just witnesses, they were the heart of why this fight mattered. Arriving at the safe house, Jake found a tense standoff. Two men in expensive suits stood in the living room, brandishing legal documents. Sarah stood protectively in front of Tommy, her eyes wide with fear but her stance defiant. Officer Reynolds, one of the men, greeted him smoothly. How convenient that you're here. We have a court order to take the boy for a medical evaluation. Surely you wouldn't interfere with a lawful order? Jake's mind raced, searching for a solution. He knew that if Tommy was taken, they might never see him again. Pharma Corp would use every legal maneuver to keep him isolated, to pressure Sarah into recanting her testimony. In that moment, Jake made a decision that would change everything. He stepped forward, placing himself between the men and the Thompsons. This order, he said slowly, buying time, I'd like to verify it with the judge who issued it. Right now. The men exchanged glances, a flicker of uncertainty crossing their faces. Jake pressed his advantage. In fact, he continued, his voice gaining strength, I think we should all take a trip down to the courthouse. I'm sure the judge would be interested to know how his order is being executed. It was a bluff, and a risky one at that. But as Jake stared down the Pharma Corp representatives, he saw the moment their resolve wavered. This isn't over, one of them muttered as they retreated, leaving the court order behind. As the door closed behind them, Sarah collapsed into Jake's arms, tears of relief streaming down her face. Tommy clung to both of them, his small body shaking. Thank you, Sarah whispered. I don't know what we would have done if. Jake cut her off gently. It's not over, he warned. They'll try again. We need to move you somewhere safer. As he made arrangements for the Thompsons' relocation, Jake knew that he had just crossed a line. He had directly interfered with what was, on paper at least, a legal court order. Pharma Corp would undoubtedly use this against him. But looking at Sarah and Tommy, seeing the trust and hope in their eyes, Jake knew he had made the right choice. This was why he had become a cop in the first place, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. As he left the safe house, making sure the Thompsons were securely on their way to a new location, Jake's phone buzzed with a message from Maria. Pharma Corp just called an emergency board meeting. Something big is happening. Jake took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. The next move in this high-stakes game was about to be made. Whatever came next, he was ready to face it head-on. The battle for Millbrook, for Sarah and Tommy, for countless others suffering under a corrupt system, was far from over. But with each challenge, with each small victory, Jake felt their momentum growing. Change was coming, and not even the combined might of Pharma Corp and their powerful allies could stop it. As he drove back to the FBI field office, the sun setting over Millbrook, Jake allowed himself a moment of cautious optimism. They had weathered every storm so far. Whatever Pharma Corp was planning next, he and his team would be ready. The real fight was just beginning, and Jake Reynolds was prepared to see it through to the end, no matter the cost. The emergency board meeting at Pharma Corp turned out to be more than just a strategic session. As Jake and his team would soon discover, it was the beginning of a desperate endgame. Late that night, as Jake pored over financial records in the FBI field office, Maria burst in, her face flushed with excitement. We've got a whistleblower, she announced breathlessly. Someone from inside Pharma Corp wants to talk. Jake's head snapped up, his fatigue instantly forgotten. Who? How reliable are they? Maria's eyes gleamed. It's big, Jake. Really big. It's Caroline Reeves, Pharma Corp's chief financial officer. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Caroline Reeves wasn't just any executive, she was Griedmann's right-hand woman, privy to the company's deepest secrets. Agent Harper, who had been listening intently, stepped forward. This could be the break we've been waiting for. But we need to move carefully. If Pharma Corp gets wind of this. Jake nodded grimly. They'll do everything in their power to silence her. We need to set up a secure meeting, somewhere they won't expect. As they formulated a plan, Jake couldn't shake a nagging sense of unease. This seemed almost too perfect, too convenient. But they couldn't afford to ignore such a potentially game-changing opportunity. The meeting was arranged for the following evening, at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. Jake, Maria, and Agent Harper arrived early, sweeping the location for any signs of surveillance or traps. As the appointed time approached, tension filled the air. Jake's hand rested near his weapon, his senses on high alert. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the empty building. Caroline Reeves emerged from the shadows, her designer suit a stark contrast to the gritty surroundings. Her face was a mask of nervous determination. "Ms. Reeves," Agent Harper stepped forward. "Thank you for coming. We understand the risk you're taking." Reeves nodded curtly. "Let's get this over with. What I'm about to tell you, it goes deeper than you can imagine." For the next hour, Reeves laid out a tale of corruption that left even the seasoned investigators stunned. She provided details of offshore accounts, blackmail schemes, and a web of influence that reached the highest levels of government. But the worst of it, Reeves said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, is what they're planning next. Greedman is desperate. He's ordered the release of a new drug, one that hasn't completed proper trials. The potential side effects, they could be catastrophic. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Why would they take such a risk? Reeves' eyes met his, filled with a mixture of guilt and resolve. Because if it works, it could treat a range of chronic conditions. The profits would be astronomical, enough to weather this storm and come out stronger than ever. As Reeves continued to divulge Pharma Corp's secrets, Jake's mind raced with the implications. This was bigger than they had ever imagined. It wasn't just about price gouging anymore, they were literally gambling with people's lives. Suddenly, a noise from outside caught Jake's attention. A faint metallic click that seemed out of place in the quiet night. "Get down," he yelled, just as the windows exploded in a hail of gunfire. Chaos erupted as Jake and Maria returned fire, while Agent Harper shepherded Reeves to safety behind a concrete pillar. The air filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder and the deafening echo of gunshots. "We need backup," Harper shouted into her radio, her voice barely audible over the firefight. Jake's mind raced as he tried to assess the situation. How had Pharma Corp found out about the meeting? The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. They still had a mole, someone who had access to their most sensitive information. As quickly as it had begun, the gunfire ceased. In the ringing silence that followed, Jake could hear the distant wail of approaching sirens. "Is everyone okay?" he called out, scanning the warehouse for any sign of movement. Affirmative responses came from Maria and Harper, but a pained groan from Reeves sent Jake rushing to her side. The CFO clutched her arm, blood seeping between her fingers. "It's just a graze," she grimaced. "But they'll be back. You need to get me out of here." The next few hours were a blur of activity. Reeves was whisked away to a secure medical facility, while Jake and his team worked to process the crime scene and coordinate with local law enforcement. As dawn broke over Millbrook, Jake found himself standing outside the FBI field office, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. The events of the night had shaken him to his core. They had come so close to losing everything. Maria approached, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "How you holding up, partner?" Jake accepted the coffee gratefully. "I can't stop thinking about how they found us. We've got another leak, Maria. Someone high up enough to know about the meeting with Reeves." Maria's expression hardened. "We'll find them, Jake. But right now, we need to focus on what Reeves told us." If Pharma Corp is really planning to release an untested drug, Jake nodded grimly. "We need to move fast. But we have to be smart about this. One wrong move and Greedman could slip through our fingers." As they discussed their next steps, Jake's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. His blood ran cold as he read it. "You're in over your head, Reynolds. Walk away now, or the next bullet won't miss." Jake showed the message to Maria, whose face darkened with anger. "They're getting desperate," she growled. "We must be close to something big." Despite the threat, Jake felt a renewed sense of determination. They had come too far to back down now. Pharma Corp's increasingly aggressive tactics only proved that they were on the right track. We need to call a meeting, Jake decided. Everyone involved in the investigation. It's time to lay all our cards on the table and figure out our endgame. As they headed back into the building, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they were approaching a point of no return. The next few days would determine not just the fate of their investigation, but potentially the lives of countless people who depended on the medicines PharmaCorp produced. The conference room was packed, a palpable tension filling the air as Jake addressed the assembled team. FBI agents, local police, prosecutors, and even a few trusted journalists listened intently as he laid out everything they had learned from Reeves. We're not just dealing with corporate greed anymore, Jake explained, his voice grave. If PharmaCorp releases this untested drug, we're looking at a potential public health crisis. We need to stop them, and we need to do it now. Agent Harper stepped forward, her face set in determined lines. I've been in contact with Washington. They're prepared to move on this, but we need ironclad evidence. We can't risk PharmaCorp wiggling out on a technicality. As the team debated strategies, Jake's mind wandered to Sarah and Tommy Thompson, to Officer Brennan's daughter, to all the faces he'd seen struggling to afford life-saving medications. They were the reason he had started this fight, and he was determined to see it through. Suddenly, a commotion outside the conference room caught everyone's attention. Samantha Chen burst in, her face flushed with excitement. You need to see this, she said breathlessly, turning on the room's large screen. The image that filled the screen made Jake's heart skip a beat. It was Philip Griedman, CEO of PharmaCorp, but not as they had ever seen him before. Gone was the polished, confident executive. This Griedman looked haggard, his eyes darting nervously as he addressed a room full of reporters. In light of recent allegations, Griedman's voice trembled slightly. PharmaCorp has decided to voluntarily recall several of our key products for additional testing. We are committed to ensuring the safety and efficacy of our medications. The room erupted into a flurry of excited voices. Jake exchanged a look of disbelief with Maria. This was unprecedented. As Griedman continued his statement, making vague allusions to internal reviews and corporate restructuring, Jake felt a surge of hope. They were close. PharmaCorp was on the ropes, and one more push might be all it took to bring them down. But even as he allowed himself a moment of optimism, Jake knew that the hardest part was yet to come. Griedman's announcement was likely a desperate ploy to buy time and goodwill. The real battle, to dismantle the corrupt system that had allowed PharmaCorp to thrive, was still ahead. As the team regrouped, strategizing their next moves, Jake's resolve hardened. They had started this fight for justice, and now, finally, the end was in sight. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever desperate tactics PharmaCorp might employ, Jake Reynolds was ready to face them head-on. The final confrontation was coming, and Millbrook, indeed, the entire country, would never be the same. As Griedman's press conference concluded, the room erupted into a flurry of activity. Jake, however, remained still, his mind racing with the implications of this sudden turn of events. It's a trap, he said quietly, causing those nearest to him to fall silent. This is exactly what Reeves warned us about. They're not recalling products out of concern for safety. They're clearing the market for their new drug. Agent Harper's eyes widened in realization. You think they're going to use this recall as cover to fast-track the release of the untested medication? Jake nodded grimly. It fits their pattern. Create a crisis, then swoop in with a solution. That makes them even more money. The team quickly mobilized, each member tasked with a crucial role in what they all knew would be the final push against PharmaCorp. Samantha Chen set off to dig deeper into the recall announcement, while Maria coordinated with local pharmacies to track any unusual distribution patterns. Jake found himself working closely with Agent Harper, poring over Reeves' testimony and cross-referencing it with the mountain of evidence they had accumulated. As the hours ticked by, a clear picture began to emerge, one of breathtaking corruption and callous disregard for human life. It was well past midnight when Jake's phone buzzed with an incoming call. The screen displayed an unknown number. Reynolds, he answered cautiously. Officer Reynolds, a familiar distorted voice greeted him. I hope you're prepared for what's coming. Tomorrow, PharmaCorp makes its final move. Jake's grip tightened on the phone. Who is this? How do you know? There's no time, the voice cut him off. Check the shipments leaving PharmaCorp's main facility tonight. And Jake, be careful. Not everyone on your team can be trusted. The line went dead, leaving Jake staring at his phone in stunned silence. After a moment's hesitation, he sprang into action, rallying a team to stake out PharmaCorp's facility. As they watched from a secluded vantage point, Jake's informant was proven right. A fleet of unmarked trucks began leaving the compound, each heading in a different direction. "We need to stop those trucks," Jake declared, his voice filled with urgency. If that's the untested drug, what followed was a coordinated operation unlike anything Millbrook had ever seen. Police cruisers and FBI vehicles swarmed the roads, intercepting the PharmaCorp trucks one by one. As dawn broke over the city, Jake stood in a warehouse surrounded by seized crates. FDA officials were already on site, conducting preliminary tests on the contents. "It's as we suspected," one of the officials reported, her face grim. "This is a new formulation, one that hasn't gone through proper trials. The potential side effects, they're devastating." Jake felt a mix of vindication and horror. They had prevented an imminent health crisis, but the fact that PharmaCorp had been willing to go this far. His thoughts were interrupted by a commotion at the warehouse entrance. To his shock, he saw Philip Griedman being led in handcuffs, flanked by FBI agents. Agent Harper approached, a satisfied smile on her face. "We got him, Jake." One of Griedman's own board members turned on him, provided us with irrefutable evidence of his direct involvement in all of this. As Griedman was led past, his eyes locked with Jake's. The once powerful CEO looked broken, his arrogance replaced by fear and defeat. But even as Jake allowed himself to feel a moment of triumph, he knew their work was far from over. Griedman was just the tip of the iceberg. The systemic corruption that had allowed PharmaCorp to operate with impunity for so long still needed to be addressed. Over the next few weeks, Jake found himself at the center of a whirlwind of activity. There were congressional hearings, where he testified alongside Sarah Thompson and other victims of PharmaCorp's greed. There were meetings with health officials and policymakers, all eager to understand how such a massive breach of public trust had been allowed to happen. Through it all, Jake remained focused on the human cost of what they had uncovered. He thought of Tommy Thompson, of Officer Brennan's daughter, of countless others who had suffered under a system that prioritized profits over people. It was during one such moment of reflection, standing outside the Millbrook courthouse after another long day of testimonies, that Jake was approached by a familiar face. Drive. Alan Prescott, the pharmacist who had first tipped him off about the price hikes. Officer Reynolds, Prescott greeted him warmly. "I just wanted to thank you. What you've done, it's going to change lives." Jake smiled, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. "I couldn't have done it without people like you, Drive, Prescott. People willing to speak up, to do the right thing even when it's hard." As they talked, Jake noticed a crowd gathering nearby. To his surprise, he saw familiar faces, Sarah and Tommy Thompson, Officer Brennan and his daughter, and many others whose stories had fueled his determination throughout the investigation. Sarah stepped forward, Tommy's hand clasped tightly in hers. "We wanted to show you what your fight means to us," she said, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Because of you, Tommy will have a future. We all will." One by one, people stepped forward to share their stories, of medications now affordable, of treatments once out of reach now within grasp, of hope restored. Jake felt overwhelmed by their gratitude, humbled by the impact of what they had accomplished. As the impromptu gathering dispersed, Jake found himself alone with Maria. His partner looked at him with a mix of pride and amusement. "So, rookie," she teased gently, "still think one person can't make a difference?" Jake chuckled, shaking his head. "I think I've learned my lesson. But it wasn't just me, Maria. It was all of us, you, Samantha, Agent Harper, every person who stood up and said, 'Enough is enough.'" Maria nodded, her expression turning serious. "And it's not over. You know that, right? There's still so much work to be done." Jake looked out over Millbrook, the city he had sworn to protect. He thought of the broader implications of their fight, the potential for real, lasting change in how healthcare was managed and regulated in America. "I know," he said softly. "But for the first time in a long time, I feel like we've got a real shot at making things right." As the sun set over Millbrook, casting long shadows across the courthouse steps, Jake Reynolds stood tall, his resolve stronger than ever. The battle against PharmaCorp had been won, but the war for justice and equity in healthcare was just beginning. He thought of the anonymous tipster who had guided them throughout the investigation, wondering if he would ever learn their true identity. He thought of the challenges that still lay ahead, the political battles, the resistance from other pharmaceutical companies, the long process of rebuilding public trust. But as he looked at Maria, at the faces of those they had helped, at the city that had stood by him through it all, Jake knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. They had taken on Goliath and won. They had proven that even in the face of overwhelming odds, justice could prevail. As Jake and Maria walked back towards the police station, ready to tackle whatever challenge awaited them next, there was a newfound spring in their step. They had embarked on this journey as cops doing their duty. They emerged as something more, champions of the people, guardians of public trust, and proof that one person, standing up for what's right, could indeed change the world. The story of Millbrook, of Jake Reynolds and his allies, would be told for years to come. It would inspire others to take a stand, to fight against corruption and greed wherever they found it. And in that legacy, in the lives touched and the system changed, lay the true measure of their victory. As night fell over Millbrook, a city forever changed by the courage of those who dared to stand up to power, Jake Reynolds looked to the future with hope. The path ahead was long, but for the first time in a long time, it was clear. And he was ready to walk it, one step at a time, towards a more just and equitable world. If you enjoyed this story, we'd love for you to support us by leaving a like and subscribing to our Slices of Life channel. We'd also love to hear from you in the comments. Which city are you talking about? It's very rewarding for us to provide our followers with an enjoyable moment. We appreciate the unconditional support you show us in every story. Blessings.